Welcome novices and acolytes to the Sisterhood, presented by DuneNewsNet.com and What the Force. Join us on this meta-mythic journey through the Dune universe.
Welcome novices to the Sisterhood. I'm Hannah, your host, and joining me today is Marie-Claire Gould from What the Force. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another meta-mythical feast. We're here to guide you through all of the mythic motifs and symbolism and maybe a little bit about what it means. You can follow the Sisterhood podcast at Podcast Above All across all social media platforms, as well as follow Dune Newsnet on YouTube for all notifications for when our episodes drop. So let's jump into a question off the top. Yeah, this is actually from Winters, who's on my Discord, saying, I watched the first episode of Dune Prophecy, and I was wondering something. For a show that seems to hinge so much on truth seeing, the show doesn't talk much about what truth actually is. There's only one moment I noticed when Kasha says that the guy from Arrakis is telling the truth, or at least that's what he believes. So this is a great question because I think what we're seeing very much is that truth is in the eye of the beholder and that we oftentimes lie to ourselves. We've actually had more conversations about lying and what that means. And that actually it's quite an advanced thing for humans to be able to lie well. And it also represents a sort of a survival technique to what is happening. And I also think we don't know that the sisters are always using their truth seeing for the truth either. They certainly hide the truth, but is that actively lying or not? What did you think, Hannah, of this question? Well, it's interesting because the acolytes, they have this lesson that's based specifically in using their truth sensibility. And you have Theodosia who her deduction is that the woman's words were true, but her intent was to deceive. So she wasn't verbally lying. She wasn't saying anything that was factually incorrect, but her intent with what she was saying was in order to deceive. And I think that sheds a light on the overall manner of which truth and lie are connected in this series, because even if something is true, it can still be used as a means to um, deceive people. And that's why it's so important that they're able to not just tell whether or not someone's telling a lie, but what is the intention behind what they're saying. That sort of reminds me of Fae or like elves who can't lie. Like they lie by telling the truth or omitting truth. And I sort of love that. It's kind of like the Aes Sedai in the Wheel of Time as well, where they're not able to lie, but they'll use their words in a way to get around that in order to get through situations. So I think we'll see more of this for sure. Yeah, I think lying and truth are very closely connected in the show, and we've definitely explored the nature of a lie a bit more than the nature of the truth for sure. I also think that unreliable narration is key to this story. Like what we think is happening might not always be what's happening. Although they've been quite truthful as the POV, we question whether Valya is actually a good narrator. But we've had no narration at all in this episode, which we thought maybe would happen, right? So we shall see. Again, they framed it in the first episode. The truths we tell others, the truths we tell ourselves, right? And versus the lies we tell ourselves versus the lies we tell others. Like, I think it will be a major theme that they're just scratching the surface of in these two episodes. Definitely. So thank you so much for that comment/question, Winters. Anyone after you see this episode or if you reach out to us online and you have questions or comments, we'll try to include them into the show. All right, let's move on to our overall themes and motifs for this episode. MC, why don't you start? Yeah, so I really wanted to talk about primarily the idea of life, death, and mythic journeys in general and going to the underworld. So in Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell outlines the hero's journey. And there's always a transformational moment where you are going to the underworld to experience a transformational situation, because you have to let go of who you were before to actually transform. Oftentimes, it's considered to be you're going off on your adventure, you're leaving your own backyard, and by entering into the mountain, like in The Hobbit, where you go in and you're facing the dragon in the depths of the mountain. That's a journey to the underworld. You're going underground. It also could be another world or a place that you're just not familiar with. It's all considered to be this idea that you are experiencing a death, which allows you to experience a rebirth. From a heroine's journey perspective, Maureen Murdoch talks about a journey into the goddess, and she uses often the symbolism of Inanna descending in Sumerian myth to meet her sister Ereshkigal in the underworld. And in that, she is stripped of her garments, her jewelry, and everything that she thought she was, to be broken down, and then is eventually killed in the underworld to be reborn. Young talks about the experience of going through this transformation as an ego death. So, ego being the self perception of who we think we are from a conscious perspective. We die when we have the ideas of who we are stripped away from us. And then, lastly, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, from a Women Who Run with the Wolves perspective. I'll just pull up the book right now. She talks about this in more simplistic terms and just says everybody goes through these transformational periods and throughout the course of our lives of a life, death, life cycle. So we are full of energy and we're experiencing life, and then something comes along and we experience a spiritual death. And from that death, we are given the opportunity to grow and collect the ancient knowledge that is within us that allows us to transform and become better and more whole through that death. We are reborn and then we are able to live again. So it's life, death, life. So the common thread behind all of these mythical journeys is that you will experience, as you're going through a hero's journey, a heroine's journey, a journey out there into the adventure, or even just from a wild woman archetype perspective, a transformation, you will experience a death in the story. And it will be oftentimes symbolic from a character perspective. Sometimes it can be literal. Like there are lots of examples in media where people die and then come back to life in more fantasy type situations. And the wild woman archetype, and I'm going to read this out loud because it's actually the myth of Laloba, and it's about the wolf woman. Interesting. The Two Wolves is this episode's name. So this is from Women Who Run with the Wolves. Clarissa Pinkola Estes is explaining the story of Laloba. She creeps through the mountains and the dry riverbeds looking for wolf bones. And when she has them assembled as an entire skeleton, she sits by the fire and thinks about what song she will sing. Then she stands over the creature, raises her arms over it, and sings. The rib bones and leg bones of the wolf begin to flesh out, and the creature becomes furred, sings more, and the creature comes to life and runs again. And this is the idea that there is ancient knowledge in the bones that allows you to be reborn in the darkness. And so throughout the episode, there is a lot of things that are happening, but primarily there's this idea of sacrifice and dismemberment. And this is a really, really key part to this life, death, life cycle. You have to be broken down. You have to have your clothes stripped away like Inanna. You have to There's the folklore of the handless maiden. She loses her hands. There's lots of dismemberment in this episode that is either mentioned or referred to as sacrifice. So this is a really, really key theme and motif, and I'll bring it up as we talk through the episode. I'm really excited about it. Yeah, it's definitely a huge part of this episode that I'm really looking forward to get to. And kind of in a similar vein, I think it's important that we discuss a little bit about rebirth. And Carl Jung, for instance, he has many different forms of rebirth that he's discussed, but one that I think is very prominent for this episode is metempsychosis, which is the transmigration of souls, the movement of a soul into another body after death. So life is prolonged in time through a different bodily experience. It is not certain that continuity of personality is guaranteed, but there's this progression and continuation. And that's essentially what other memory is, especially in the way that it's presented in this show, where these souls are able to, in a way, inhabit and take on this other body, and their life is prolonged in a way. I think there's a quote that Emmeline says at one point where she says that death is not the end. This is a really interesting element of rebirth that is present within the Dune universe. And we're sure we'll see some other examples throughout the show, but this is very prominent. So we're going to discuss some archetypes now. We're going to mainly focus on king archetypes because there hasn't been a lot of movement and progression through certain other characters' arcs so far. MC, why don't you take it away? Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the king archetype in relation to what is happening. So last episode we talked a lot about the life archetypes in general, and just as a quick summary, these tie to the different phases of life: early life, midlife, and then kind of more elderly years. And they reflect our own human experience. Just as a warning, some of these have more masculine or feminine names. They are not gendered. They are more of a reflection of whether you are facing outward from a spiritual psychic journey perspective, or you're facing inward and trying to sort of integrate different shadow aspects of yourself. And we have a new king in the form of Valya, and we have a puppet king or a sick king in the form of Havico. So the king themselves represents the kingdom. The king and the kingdom are one. So if the kingdom is a puppet and controllable or controlled or sick, then the kingdom is sick. Valya is a new king because she has been hiding in the Sisterhood and working on sort of just growing the family, growing the mission, growing the things that she had been previously done, which is quite tied to the queen archetype, which is all about building the family and securing the next generation and helping those within her management grow. But the king is actually at the archetypical height of their power before they sort of descend into, elderly age, or just, a later part of life past being in the prime of the spotlight. They are a leadership archetype and are the person that everyone goes to seek leadership and counsel. And oftentimes, what is helpful to understand about kings is that they are heading towards eventual sacrifice. And if they're not ready for that sacrifice, they often turn into tyrants because they become greedy and want to hang on to their power. Um, and what faces the king themselves is the cataclysm. So something that they've never faced before, and young rebels who want to overthrow them and change how things are done in the kingdom. At some point, a healthy king will realize that the best thing that he can do is step aside for the sake of the kingdom. Only tyrants try to hang on longer than they are required. So I would expect that this will play into the story because we have almost two sides of a conflict that are both represented by king archetypes. We have Valya, who represents the Sisterhood, who is not only putting up a cataclysm of challenges against Havico. So she has paid for rebels. She has incited the houses to put him into a weak position. And he himself sees it as a cataclysm himself. He will be fed to Shai-Hulud. He'll be fed to the worm if he doesn't get the spice going. And then he also knows that there's rebels, there's people that are going after him in the sidelines. Those are all created by Valya herself. It's almost like we have two kingdoms in the same kingdom happening. But then on Valya's side, she sees Terran era fall, this cataclysm at the end of everything that seems so overwhelming. Plus, she has the rebel of Desmond coming after her. This idea that there is a belief that either she shouldn't exist, her sisterhood shouldn't exist, or that it should be replaced by him in that power, right? So I think it's really fascinating that we almost have two lenses of the same archetype. And then we have sort of just two clarifications, I think, that are related to the king archetype. Natalya herself has gone from a passive snow queen, very protective, the snow queen kind of like being like Elsa, to a more aggressive sorceress. And the sorceress is wanting to protect the family and the institution of, the emperor and her daughter and probably Constantine. But she's taking a more active role. And I actually think that she might go full tyrant with Havico as well.
Yeah.
Because like she's the one who's doing all of these active things. I'm not 100% sure she's out of that queen phase yet. It kind of depends on how much of an active role and leadership role she starts to play. And Havico could stay a puppet. Like he literally lets everyone push him around. Just
it would be interesting.
Yeah, he listens to the most recent voice.
He does. It would be interesting to see like if he were to stay in a puppet and then Natalya would move into a tyrant.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens there.
And then I also want to mention Desmond, because Desmond is a complicated character for me, because I think it very much from his POV, like if you think about his worldview, he is a hero of old. He is the Joseph Campbell hero fighting the witches, and the famous antagonist for a hero's journey is the dragon, right? Symbolically, the dragon is the darkness within ourselves. And because of who he's fighting, it's his inner feminine. The other antagonist for the hero is the sick king, who we've already identified. And he is trying to heal the sick king by bringing the blood of the dragon to the sick king to heal him. That is one of the sort of symbols and themes that we often see in this. But very much to our dragons, i.e. the women wearing the snakes and the worm representations, i.e. our sisterhood, he is a bully. He is a predator. And so I'm finding it very interesting that if you switch the point of views between the characters, you can almost see the same archetype, but less damaging or less negative from their own perspective. And very much I think that villains are just heroes stuck in the underworld.
Yes, I think that's my favorite way of looking at it, because he really does feel this sense of righteous purpose in what he's doing.
And he thinks he's going to heal the sick king.
Yeah.
And he's going to go fight that dragon.
He is. What exactly happened to him on Arrakis? And what god specifically is he clinging to? Because I guess what I'm curious about is he at all influenced by some sort of Fremen faith? Because of his time on Arrakis?
So he's experienced going into the underworld himself. So we just talked about that in the mythic motifs. He was swallowed by the worm. We saw that on the hollows. So that would be like he went into the belly of the whale. You think Jonah and the whale. You think Pinocchio being swallowed by the whale. You're going into the underworld. This is a symbol that is very, very old, to be swallowed by the beast, because the beast also represents the earth, and you go into the underworld to be broken down. And then he calls out later on the episode, and this is like, I want to call it out now because it ties to what I just said about the mythic motif. He experienced a psychic dismemberment. He said he lost his eye and gained wisdom and foresight.
Yes.
So losing the eye, going, Marie-Louise von Franz, who was a student of Jung, talks about archetypical symbols in fairy tales. And she says going blind is like being submerged in water. The unconscious, right? Submerged in water. That's the unconscious symbol, or becoming an animal. These are all representative of going into the unconscious. The unconscious is psychologically what we talk about as going to the underworld. When we go into ourselves symbolically, we go to a death-like state because we can't live in our unconscious permanently. And so I don't know if he's actually left the underworld, right? That's where I'm like really excited about his story and what he represents, because it's giving us a lot to talk about symbolically, about these journeys and where you are archetypically and whether you've actually transformed. And if you are in a negative archetype, you can't play well with others.
So let's jump into the episode, I guess.
Did you want to talk about the intro at all?
Yes, I do.
What are your
The
favorite
intro.
bits of the intro?
First off, the bull. They have a bull in the intro.
Bulls are tied to sacrifice. They're tied to the Atreides.
Yep.
It's very apparent that this is sort of a visual representation of the House of Atreus mythic motif, which we talked about last episode. So go back to that one if you want to listen to that. I loved it so much. I was so happy to see that. I'm like, great, we're gonna get more like backstory on the Atreides line.
Yeah. And I thought it was cool because there was this moment where you see this sort of like ice world, and then you see a whale, but a furry whale.
The fur of the whale.
Yeah, which is just that's so cool because it's like one of those things in Dune where you're reading it and it's like this passing thing, but actually getting to see that in live action is just like a really cool nerdy moment for me.
Reference last episode where
Mhm.
Baron Harkonnen talked about whale fur. Now to actually see it in the intro is really cool.
And then the moment where like it starts out with one of those sisterhood hand gestures, and then it like turns into a bloody knife, and then the blood drips down and it drops into that basin of water in the first episode in the flashback that all of the sisters were sort of like meditating around, and then it turns the water red, and then that transitions into the pomegranate from last episode as well,
Yeah.
which was just so
And that
neat.
knife is
Um,
is Desmond's knife.
oh, it is
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Because he has this like
Benny Gesserit power.
curved
Yeah.
knife. Yeah. Um, there was a lot of ties of the eye symbolism
Hmm.
to the worm. You'll notice that we've totally switched out our vibe here from our pre-show, because we're like, oh, eyes. Yes, let's get more eyes in there. So the eyes being tied to the worm. And I was really happy to see, Arrakis in the intro, etc.
Mm.
But I'm obsessed with the last closing symbol,
Yes.
which is the ring. And then you see the ring separated from, we couldn't really tell what it was in the first episode. The sort of Ouroboros snake is wrapped around
Mm.
the Mother Superior's ring. It is a gom jabbar.
Yes.
So this is like the poisoned needle that is used in Dune, of course, part 1, to test Paul with the box.
Hmm. It's
And I'm like,
so.
whoa, yeah.
I'm so excited for that. I really, really want to see a Gom Jabbar in this season. And then the intro kind of ends with an eye, and in particular, the eye of the Ibad, the blue eye that the Fremen have, or someone who's consumed enough spice,
Mhm.
or had enough exposure to spice constantly, in which their eye completely turns blue, the blue within blue. And that's just like such a cool like burst of color as we transition into the title sequence. Oh, it's so good.
It's great. I'm really happy with the title sequence. I understand why we didn't get it in the first episode,
Mhm.
but HBO's really good at title sequences, so
They
it's
are,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's dig in.
Yeah. So we start with a ship in space, and it's landing on Wallach 9, and it's a transport ship, and off of the ship comes a Sook doctor, which is one of the schools within the Dune universe. She goes to examine Kasha's body after what happened, and we find out from Tula that um, she's a sister of the Sisterhood, and she's also started studying at the Sook school. They allowed her to return in order to do this, and she says that she's a sister first. So they're examining the body, and essentially she is telling Tula that there was no accelerant that caused the burning that happened to her. It essentially it came from the inside, and there was no clearly discernible outside force that caused this. No accelerant. After that is when we see our four key girls, acolytes, in the library discussing what happened with Kasha. Emmeline accepts that this is something that happens when you're a sister, you are devoted to the cause, and that includes being willing to die for it. And Jen is very opposed to this idea. Lila's just kind of sitting there absorbing this sort of debate of ideology that the two of them are having. And then Theodosia kind of interjects and she says that this is not a coincidence, that the Emperor's truthsayer dies just before this wedding. It's clearly an assassination.
So, couple of thoughts. So, with the sister, she actually says that it was an imbalance in the meridians in her
Mhm.
body. And so that is from Chinese medicine. That means that
Okay.
there was too much yin or too much yang, which of course is represented cold and hot, right? Um,
Okay, interesting.
and so, like, if there was too much yang, it's like the male energy inside of the
Mm.
body versus yin, which is cold and feminine
Okay, so there was too much masculine. The
energy on the inside between the meridians in her body. That's what she said. Uh,
That's really interesting.
and yeah, it absolutely ties to this idea of like this sacrifice is tying to this idea of the dismemberment, and it's brought up to Lila several times over the course of the episode itself. This is just the first time. I did love, and I wanted to ask you, Hannah. What did you think of "You are aware of my circumstances" that Theodosia says when she's offered to come with Valya to go
Interesting.
and help with her? I'm like,
Well,
"Cool, a
um,
shadow, something we don't know, a
yeah,
dark
well,
secret."
there was definitely it was like this felt like it kind of two things to me. Like one is the initial reluctance to embark on the journey. Like she's like
Mhm.
happy at home in the sisterhood, but now this is like she's leaving home and she has to embark on the world out there, which means facing her shadow
Mhm.
and this stuff from her past. And I think also it seems like it's suggested that particularly it's something that has to do with Seleucus Secundus. I'm very curious what her backstory is there.
Definitely feels like it's
Yeah.
related to where she's going, right? So, you know, unfortunately, like when you go on a journey, an adventurer's journey, when you're out there, you have to face your shadows, you have to face your darkness and your history. Very much when I refer to shadows, I'm talking about the idea that everyone has baggage. Everyone has things that they are not proud of or they haven't dealt with. Those tie us down. Robert Bly, the author and poet who was a Jungian, really talks about the Jungian shadow a lot and actually calls it a garbage bag that we trail
Mhm.
behind us. And, you think of the idea of the shadow as almost like when you get together with somebody in a relationship and they've got a lot of baggage and you're like, "Oh no, I don't want to have to deal with all their baggage because they're not dealing with it themselves." That's the
Mm.
shadow, that garbage bag that we trail behind us. And the more we ignore it, the smellier it gets. And we oftentimes, if we're not dealing with our own baggage, with our own shadow, we'll project it out there into the world and we'll see enemies where they don't exist because they are actually our internal shadow.
Yeah.
So, this is great.
I think there's a reason why we haven't been told much about Theodosia's backstory yet, whereas kind of all of the other girls we've gotten at least a significant amount of their backstory. Oh, and another little like fun tidbit is when Theodosia's by the bookshelf in the library, on one of the spines of the books is that same ring sigil of the snake around the Gamja bar. So I thought that was really cool.
And this is sort of interesting because we know, because of the conversations that they have had last episode, Valya and Tula have talked about how Theodosia is Valya's favorite. She is her chosen successor, right? So it's interesting, I think.
The girls have been like discussing and stuff. And then right before Valya goes to recruit Theodosia to go to Seleucus Secundus, she has this exchange with her sister in Mother Superior's office that overlooks the library. And Valya is basically saying to Tula that she needs to go to Seleucus Secundus and she needs Tula to step in for her, but she needs her to be in control of her emotions, and her emotions
Yeah.
can blind you. And she needs her to make some hard choices. And then Tula says something really interesting. She says, "When have I ever shied away from hard choices?" And then basically Valya tells her that what she needs her to do is to get Lila to connect with her ancestors and to undergo the Agony. Um, and Tula's very reluctant about this at first. And Valya says that the reason why she can't accept this is because she cares so much for and Tula says that it's because she raised her, but then Valya says, but she's not your child. And then Tula has this really emotional reaction. All of a sudden she just like breaks down and falls into a chair with her hand over her eyes. Like that statement really cut deeply for her. And then eventually she accepts that this is something that she has to take on. But then she warns Valya that making Lila undergo the agony, it doesn't just risk Lila's life. It also puts the secrets that these four key girls from the prologue, from the intro.
They called them the founding sisters, right? They had a name. They were like the founding something.
They were
Like,
definitely the first kind of ones that were being trained by
yeah. Yeah, like they called them like the founding sisters, I think.
I think
as
so.
an explanation that these four have been the key to bringing the sisterhood to where it is currently.
Yeah. And they have secrets that they've gone to lengths to protect, but putting Lila through this exposed them. And Valya seems like she's not worried about that. So then Tula's going to take over while Valya's away.
And then we head to Seleucus Secundus, Pruitt's funeral. I don't have a lot of thoughts on this other than to establish that, like, Crow really cannot face anybody. This just shows how much, like, he would show up if Kasha was there, I think, but it just shows how much of a sort of puppet he really is. Like, he doesn't have any spine whatsoever.
Yeah. And you can see how distraught Ynez is in this scene. And we find out how much it affects her and why later on. And also throughout this entire scene, Pruitt's older sister is eyeing Constantine the entire time.
Which, I mean, is not even like a Chekhov's, I don't have a good thing. I don't want to swear, but, you know, I effing.
Yeah.
That's
Chekhov's
great.
femme fatale.
I guess that's better than what I was saying. Thank you, Anna. You know, like the old Chekhov's gun, it goes off eventually. Other than to prove like how Havico like cannot lead right now at all. Like it wasn't that hard to show up to the kids' funeral. But he's feeling guilty and he's like, I gotta confront Desmond, you know. And that is where we go to next with Desmond. Like, hey, I just gave you what you wanted. Very like devil on his shoulder situation.
He's so calm and composed in this scene with the Emperor. He's not worried about his personal safety at all. He's not worried about being arrested or punished or anything. And Havico is so like mortified and taken aback and fearful of the idea that something he said had this consequence.
Yep.
And
then
that it's had
ties to the puppet archetype in that they don't want to take power at all. They want to lean on somebody else to do the decision making for them, which Havico has apparently done for years with the Kasha, right?
I think
He's been lulled into being.
And he doesn't, I think what's scary to him about this is he doesn't know what the consequence of it'll be. Because he's been like basing all of the decisions that he makes on what Kasha's been telling him. And that would be based on, oh, well, if we do this, then this will happen. Or if we don't do this, then this will happen. And he has no idea what kind of fallout this will be and then how to address it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he has no confidence. He has no ability. And it's almost like how, like, Desmond is like tempting him with like power, right? And like that's like, he's almost like, please become a tyrant for me, please. like here's this, all this, like, you can be greedy, right? You could see that I will be your weapon. And like the most famous bully I know in all of media is Darth Vader. It is an archetype of stagnation. You are literally stuck, like Vader is stuck inside of a walking coffin. Desmond is stuck in who he is in this moment, in that he is a soldier and he wants to be a weapon for somebody that will destroy his enemies in amongst all of the things that are going on. And so I found it very funny when Haviko arrested him and put him in suspension. Good. I'm good in the dark because I'm stuck here anyways, being a bully like I am, being a villain. But I thought it was great, and being like floaty suspended in a prison in the basement of the palace is like the most Dune thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that's ever existed before, but it was really cool.
Yeah.
We cut to Tula and Lila, and Tula's approaching Lila about the situation. Hey, we got this thing we need to know. And it's awkward, but you're of the line of Mother Raquel. So would you be willing to drink the water of life and go through the agony just so you could answer a question? Because we could really use some clarification.
Yeah. I think very subtly they've been establishing how close the two of them are. When she's in the library, you can see Lila's eyes following Tula when she leaves the medical room or whatever, and then you can see her still watching her when she's up there looking over the library. So they're very closely connected to each other. And in the scene, they hold hands and she's trying to comfort her, telling her this stuff. But then when she realizes that she's somewhat excited, like, oh, I know where I come from. And then the moment she realizes you need to undergo the agony, she pulls away abruptly.
Yeah, that was great. Because, like, like, I think that maybe not every sister wants to go through it, right? And I think that maybe Lila thought in her head, like, one day, because, like, it seems like she's thought it through. Like, it takes years. There's training, like, she had thought about it. But yeah, she was definitely not ready for it now. It's kind of like saying, hey, go through menopause early to get these psychic powers and this, like, connection to your ancestors. Nobody's going to say yes to that.
No, yeah. And this also in a way feels like that traditional sort of hero journey of this is the proposal of the mission, the quest.
Denial of the call. She goes through a lot of that, like figuring it out, what it means to her, why she would want to do it. The denial of the call is actually a very important moment for the hero because, look, going to the underworld is not for everybody, as we see in this episode. It's hard, even symbolically, when you're confronting your own history and what makes you up and this sort of wisdom that is deep within you. It's hard to face the truth about what actually makes you up and the truth about your own darkness and where it comes from.
Yeah, definitely. Right after this, this very emotional moment, we cut to Constantine and Pruitt's older sister.
Do we ever get her name?
I don't think so. I think even on IMDb, she's just credited as like Lady Rechess or something like that.
Chasey, as they pronounce them. So this is the Dune version of Netflix and Chill.
Yeah.
And they're in a beautiful place.
The cinematography of this scene is actually stunning.
The hookup room. Where is this? It looks like it's underground. It looks like it's maybe in a forest underground. There's like, or like a garden, and it's got these like cool curtain-y things, and then like a cool chaise, a couch. Like, My God. This guy spends all of his like free emperor money, his allowance on his hookup room. Yeah. So like post coitus, they enter into this political maneuvering situation, and it's literally Vixen v. Vixen. Like,
Yes.
it's so funny because, vixens of course are defined by sort of this aggressive nature in the maiden phase, but fundamentally they are willing to use underhanded methods to get whatever they want. This was a vixen show off. They're rebellious to a point, so they're like doing their spice and they're having their sex. But fundamentally, they're under the thumb of a parental or authority figure that they either want to impress or that they're under the commands of. Um, they can only return to a centered maiden arc if they learn to have nurturing self-respect and esteem. They hate the situation that they're in, and they use their power to control and manipulate others to try and survive. And so
But
what is Constantine doing? He's trying to get information that will put him ahead in either probably Natalya's eyes or Havoco's or somebody within court. He's trying to get ahead, and he ends up giving up for.
he's not very good at this. He was good at the other part, but this part he's not so good at.
Like, I hate to put the title on him, but he's got big himbo energy.
Yeah, he does. Right now, anyway.
Just not very good at being a vixen.
No, not
Maybe.
subtle about it either. She was very much distracting him with things and different topics and
Giving him
seizing
more
it, you know.
spice, and
Which,
he's like,
just, but
so what's going on with your dad?
he just goes straight to it. Oh my gosh. And then the part where she's like trying to get him to do more spice, and then he's like, any more, and I'm going to be useless to you. And she's like, no, not useless. And it's like, so if she's not trying to have more sex with you, then what is she trying to get you super high for?
Oh, my
He doesn't
baby
even
boy.
consider. Oh, geez.
Oh, it's now the time to enter into your theory. Did we talk about who we think his mother is last time?
Well, I think we touched on it, but now I think it's officially confirmed in this episode that Constantine is Ynez,
A bastard.
half brothered. But in this episode, it's confirmed that he's a bastard. And we still don't have any like mention of her other than like Tula
We
mentioned.
saw
earlier.
her. We think she's
Yeah, but
Francesca's son, right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't think there's a doubt now. Like
No.
I think, yeah. And I think that
I'm
Francesca's
so
going to be
curious.
so seductive of Havoco. Like, I think that Francesca's going to be the weapon that's like, oh, you're locking me out of the palace. Valya says, I'm going to bring in your ex-girlfriend.
Constantine makes the most sense because, like, why can't he see his mom? Yeah, you don't want the sisters here, but, like, why are you saying no to your son seeing his mom? And to literally just be there under the guise of, I want to be with my child.
Yeah.
And then she'll worm her way in. And I think it's
Yeah.
also interesting to see, like, what her influence will be over Constantine as well.
Yeah.
And, like, what she'll impart on him and how that'll, like, shift his character arc.
Yeah. He needs to grow up and also like find value in himself. And I think that her being around will help that. You know, because he does. He feels very lost as a character, and I think that's purposeful. But like, he's the guy I'm like most invested in. Oddly, like he seems like a lost puppy.
He does, and like he likes playing his balisette, and he loves his sister, and he's just wanting to do good so his dad will be proud of him.
He's good at playing the balisette and looking
He's
good.
good at playing the balisette and other things, but
and other things. Oh, Constantine. So then we move to Natalya and the Emperor having like a moment talking about Desmond, and the Emperor's like, oh, he did things that I asked him to do. How dare he? So funny. Like Merkstrong is doing so much to show how much of a puppet this Emperor is.
It's like he's so enraged because he doesn't think that they can handle the scenario where the Duke won't find out.
Yeah.
Because, like, he's worried that he'll be blamed for it, but it's like, you're the emperor. Couldn't you spin it as Pruitt had forbidden technology? This is the punishment that is deserved? Like, he's
Yeah,
not
like he
thinking about, like, the authority that he has and how he could easily just, like, this is what it is.
yeah, and the puppet, like, rejects, like, holding authority. They want
Mhm.
somebody else to do it. It's so passive and it's hard, right? And Hannah, how does it feel to be super duper right about everything?
Amazing. For Natalya, like, being
Desmond's biggest advocate and, like,
yep.
turning it on its head from being, like, this passive, like, she's like, "No, sorceress," like, moves, like, in his ear, like how Kasha used to be, but why would we turn away somebody who is so loyal to us?
Mm.
Why? And Heviko is just a puppet, like, she's literally, like, whispering in his ears, like, "Whoa," "Why would we turn away a loyal person when we have so many enemies, for our enemies?"
Mhm.
Like, wow. Great
Yeah,
stuff.
and Talia is good at this.
Yeah.
She's good at getting close to him and getting him to listen to her, even though they're clearly distant within their marriage. And she's good at being sly with the ways that she manipulates him. And the way that she even talks to the Duke earlier is very, like, she's able to subtly handle the scenario.
Havigo wants to be led around by the women in his life. He
Mhm.
really does. Like, I mean, I don't know so much that he would have gone in with Desmond if
Mhm.
Natalia hadn't been so confident and in a way tease him.
Yeah,
And again, I'm
that's fair.
leaning towards that Natalia's going to become the tyrant in the
Mhm.
story. Um, it depends. Like, Avico
Mhm.
he could step up, but he's so passive right now. Like, literally, he only does what she tells him to do in
Yeah.
this episode. Still.
And that's a fair point because I think, well, at least for now, she's a good mm, juxtaposition for the Sisterhood's influence
Mhm.
in terms of, like, the feminine influence in Habakkuk's life, but that's going to shift again once Francesca's in
Yeah.
the picture. But for now, she actually is putting up a bit of a fight, which she hadn't ever done before when Kasha was around. And
Yeah,
which is so
yeah.
interesting that now Valya, the mother superior, is entering the picture, but Natalia's like, no, I'm standing my ground now. This is
Yeah.
my man. I get to control him.
Not letting another woman walk in and then Francesca again, this is where I think that, like, Valia is gonna be like, "Oh, okay. I'm gonna bring in your ex-girlfriend. That'll be fine. She's my bestie.
Mm,
We're gonna be fine. I'll let her talk to you."
mm.
Yeah.
Exactly. We get a scene of Tula. It's at night in the main area of the Sisterhood where the pool is. And Tula's harvesting some of the moss that grows around the pond. And
I'm
what's so
obsessed with this.
interesting about this is Clarissa Piccola Estes has referred to the wild woman archetype as being mossy.
Yeah, and, this is part of the death, life symbolism. So, a woman, when she needs to die, Clarissa Piccola talks about it. She's like, "You need to go into a cave. It needs to be moist and mossy, and you need to die." And she's like, "And you need to die in this cave, and then you will be reborn. Your bones will remember what to do. You can rearrange your bones just like the wolf woman does, and then you can be reborn and refleshed out." And so the use of moss, of course, symbolically means renewal and fertility and a fresh beginnings. But, I really love that this came out this way as something she was collecting to, like, experiment with the waters of life and to maybe give her protege an extra leg up in the transformation of life, death, life.
And then right after this, we get that other scene with Lila, and she approaches Emmeline and she wants to know more about sacrifice and martyrdom and what that means. Emmeline tells her a bit about her family history and how they were with one of the Butler families. This event, the Machine Wars in Dune, is called the Butlerian Jihad. That's because Ryla Butler incited this jihad against the thinking machines. Emmeline's telling her a story about how her family had been with her at the time and they were in this position where they knew they weren't going to survive, but they held out long enough to allow reinforcements to come in and ships to come in order to defeat the machines. She ends on a sentiment that human life is sacred, and that's why there is no greater honor than to give it. We shouldn't be afraid because in death, we are reunited with our foremothers.
Yeah. And this ties very much to the theme and the sort of symbolism that I've been talking about, like the sacrifice and the dismemberment and giving up yourself for these things. But it's also tied very much to the king phase, in that the king has to let go of power and die to let the kingdom live. It could be symbolic, it could be metaphorical, or it could be literal. And oftentimes, North American story, there's a lot more king sacrifice where they do not come back and they do not return from the journey or experience old age. But there is value in returning from death, as we see in some of our favorite stories, that there is a key point to having this wisdom return to the younger generation.
Mhm. Jen sort of overhears this conversation that they have, and that kind of comes back around a little bit later as well, because she very much opposes this idea that Emmeline has.
Because fundamentally, it's also tying back to a theme that we talked about last episode, the
Mhm.
House of Atreus consumption theme, the idea that this is Lila's young. This is still sacrificing the children for the overall goals of the sisterhood. Much like Jessica sacrifices Paul and sacrifices the Fremen and, sacrificing the future to gain power over the present is kind of the
Mhm.
idea. And it's hard. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it other than that both sides seem to be making the same mistakes. They are also seeming to be on the same journey. And it's a very masculine versus feminine fight that seems to be happening, sort of represented by
Yeah.
this weak masculine figure in Havico and this strong feminine figure and in Valya. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it other than that's an ongoing masculine feminine theme. Fundamentally, we as humans want a union of opposites. We want them to
Mhm.
be able to work together. But
Yes.
the marriage of a sister and a royal bloodline of a child wasn't the right union.
Yeah. I think they'll start to figure it out
Yeah.
when they kind of have this idea around the Kwisatz Haderach. So then after this, we see Tula. She's creating the poison at this point, and she like pours this clear liquid over the moss, and then the liquid turns blue, which is really interesting. Um, and this other sister comes in, and she's essentially a spy for Valya, who just wants to make sure that Tula's going to follow through. But Tula kind of holds her ground and is like, it's still Lila's decision whether or not she's going to do this.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we leave it, where we're not sure whether or not she's going to do it. But then we get back to Valya and Theodosia
Oh,
arriving
but first, I
on.
have a question for you. So,
Mhm.
traditionally, we're familiar with the water of life,
Yes.
right? Being the thing that they use. Um, this isn't the water of life, is it?
No, this is they call it the Rosak poison, which um Rosak, I'm not sure how to
Rosek?
pronounce it
Yeah.
exactly. But it's a planet, and it's the original planet that the Sisterhood were on prior to Wallach 9. And it's called that because they discovered the poison there. Actually, what's interesting is I think by the time the Dune movies, or like that, by that point where the Dune books take place, the predominantly used is the water of life created by the sandworm, but I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I'll have to reread to clarify that.
Mhm.
But in the movies, at least, in part two, Jessica, when she's about to do her spice agony, Paul asks her about it, and she says that different cultures and worlds have different ways that you become a Reverend Mother, and she doesn't know what the Fremen version is going to be. But essentially, the point of the process is dying, essentially, and then coming
Mhm.
back to life. It's a literal rebirth in that sense.
Nah, in part 2 with Paul's death. And I hope we get to cover that eventually because it's really cool what's going on in those movies.
I'll get to basically talk about like every different form of rebirth that exists in Dune. Like they cover all of the ones that Carl Jung has talked about. So it's really interesting. But so essentially you just have to take a poison like that and be able to transmute it within your body. It's not going to kill you anymore. And then that experience is what allows you to go within the unconscious and connect with the other memory. So yeah, so this is a different poison. This isn't from the worm. But I'm curious if we'll see them come in contact with the water of life that we're traditionally familiar with at some point in the series, whether in future seasons or what.
I think they need more funding to go to Arrakis. It's very expensive to film there.
I do have theories about that, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
But yeah, we're on Seleucus Secundus with Valya and Theodosia, and I wanted to talk a little bit about our Mother Superior's outfit. Okay, so it's completely different than the rest of the Reverend Mothers. The Reverend Mothers wear the sort of boxed one with the veil that kind of, it's very segmented. You know, the robes, of course, speak to being holy, otherworldly, separating, right? The veil itself will separate between this world and the beyond and the powers that they hold, these like very strong powers. And I know that like there's a lot of argument that the mothers really don't have like superpowers, but they kind of do, right? They're all enhanced by spice. All people within the Imperium are. But her veil and her sort of she has I forget what it's called, but it's like a medieval like hat.
Oh yeah.
And a veil, and it looks like she's a normal person.
Yeah. It's like she looks
And it's a
like
thin veil, and
nobility.
it doesn't even really like block her face at all. It's very, very thin. You know, she's not as removed from the woes of the kingdom. She's very much present in the world, and her cloak is pinned with a doubled Ouroboros that is eating kind of up its tail, not the full tail, but up its tail. But I found it fascinating that she is not veiled as much, and maybe that's the benefit of being a Mother Superior, because she certainly doesn't seem to need to be, but I thought her outfit was fascinating.
You know, that's interesting because I think there's this idea of the sisterhood maneuvering in the shadows, and I think part of the veil is so that you can't really see them.
Yeah.
Especially in the middle of the politics. They're in the throne room. They're a passive player,
But she is seen
like,
and she is
yeah,
known.
I mean, they're an active player in the fact that they're maneuvering what's going on, but they are perceived as a passive player in what's happening because of these veils. And so the other noble houses, they can accept their influence more. But what's interesting about Valya is she's not taking on that pretense, and maybe it is because she's a Mother Superior, but she's willing to just walk right in, and I am
who I am
here.
And she's like literally, she is a king in her own right. Like, hey, it's a surprise visit. I don't want them to know I'm here, right? Because then they can prepare things.
Everyone kind of pauses and takes a moment of like, oh, the Mother Superior is here. And so she has gravitas. When she comes in, Habakkuk's in the middle of telling the Duke, none of this stuff that you've heard about is true, because the Duke's like, your bastard just told us everything, essentially. And he's like, no, none of that information is true. And that's when Valya comes in. And so she's seeing him in the middle of this lie. But then, and the Duke's not satisfied with that. So he's like making threats
So
about the ship.
she like uses her like fingers to communicate to the other Reverend Mother, who's his truthsayer, and she's like, remove him, like, get here, I gotta deal with this stuff. And it's just like, so she's so powerful, and they do a really good job of showing her as instantly respected, instantly everybody kind of like I guess you just don't screw with her. Like, that's the lesson.
And like, even when the Reverend Mother is like, the way that she handles the Duke is, it's actually interesting that she says, "Don't let us," and like we, as if they're both the same being. Like when she's talking about him making like impassioned words that like he'll regret or whatever, she's phrasing it as if they're the same kind of entity, which is interesting. But essentially she's like, part of that is the Mother Superior's here, so watch yourself.
Mother Superior's here. She's going to fix the problem. Like, Mama's come home. She's like empathetic. She's like the loss of a life. She does all the things. It's great. I love this scene.
Yeah.
Something they talk about in acting is how you show you're a high status character versus a low status character. And Rachese, as much as he was like, I'm a high status character, when she walks in, he's like, maybe I'm not.
Like, wait a second,
The parents are speaking.
It's like when a kid dresses up in their parents' clothes and then they're like, I am a big adult. And then your parent walks in and they're like, oh, sorry, I was like,
Yeah. So, he leaves with his truthsayer, and she approaches, Tavico lies again, and she's like, you don't need to lie. By the way, that lady that you really liked, Kasia, also burned to death. Wild, hey? I'd love to interrogate your dude. And Natalya's face when she says that Kasia died of being burned was like wild. Like, it was like trying to hold back her glee under like feigned, like, oh.
For like a second, I was wondering, did he have a private conversation with her, just like he had a private conversation with Habako, and she insinuated that she would want Kasia dead, although I like maybe like it would have
I think it
happened,
was
like,
just
when
enough
he
that
got-
Kasia was in the throne room with Desmond.
Yeah, I think so. But I think this also is like when she knows that that's what he did, she's like immediately sold on him.
I don't know that we know that he did that. Like, I don't know that's official. He just says that she deserved to die. He didn't actually say he did it.
Okay.
I still think that she killed herself. But that's right?
It's definitely possible. Like, I think him having figured out a way to do that somehow and her just taking on this, like,
It doesn't seem like it's got like a
collective
range
unconscious-
like Haviko says. I just don't. I think she did it to herself with like becoming the martyr that we're talking about with this King phase,
Yeah.
so that Valya and the Sisterhood can live and change course and course correct. I truthfully think she did it to herself. I think she stepped out of the way. She said, I can no longer, do this. Like, she's not consciously doing it, but she manifested the horror, the burning truth, so that Valya would see it. I still think
But
that's
for sure,
yeah.
that does make the most sense. But I think Natalya in this moment is considering, oh, Desmond might have done that.
Yeah.
And she's clearly like, okay, this guy is useful.
She's so
This guy's-
happy. She hated Kasia.
Wait until Francesca enters the
too.
picture.
Oh my God. Yeah. So then, they agree, like, Natalya's like, oh, why don't we use the Mother Superior, I mean, I think that Natalya just wanted to know if Desmond had actually killed Kasia. How powerful is this guy? It doesn't actually matter if she actually did. It just matters if Valya thinks that he killed Kasia.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think I wasn't expecting her to be so like, oh yeah, let's let Valya do this. But it makes so much more sense like after the scene when you know that like very clearly she knows that the sisters have an ability and she wants to know as much as she can about Desmond to evaluate how useful he is. So she wants to allow Valya to like have this chance to interrogate him just to like know what Valya's able to drag out of him. So yeah.
Yeah. You got to know what your tool can do before you use it. So Valya and Theodosia visit Ynez, and this is a cool scene. This is a cool scene about controlling your emotions and all of that, and the practice that the Bene Gesserit have given her and Cash has trained her. This represents the old classic death of the mentor that many maidens slash heroes undergo in that has been standing in their way of kind of taking their own path and doing their own journey. She still kind of denies the call onto her own path because she immediately asks her Valya to still continue on with the sisterhood. And Valya's response is, "We want that for you too, but we have to talk to the emperor." Um, and I thought that was very interesting because she kind of reacts to the death of the mentor, but hasn't sort of used that in a way to grow in her own way.
I love this scene too because of the way that the camera goes around tracking Valya as she's observing her and the way that she's able to calm herself with her breathing. It's such a well done scene. But also, what I felt was interesting was there's this moment where we know that Ynez is kind of stuck in this damsel phase, but she almost goes deeper into that in this moment when she turns to Valya and she's like, "Please take me with you.
Yeah,
Please, I want to
exactly.
start." She's begging for someone to take her out of the tower. She's not
Yeah,
trying to escape
exactly.
herself.
So she's not heeding the roadblock. She's denying the call more and becoming more of a
Mhm.
prisoner. And we didn't really bring this up in the archetypes because we think she might have been heading towards a more balanced maiden phase with like making her own decisions, but she wants to be managed. So she's becoming more
Mhm.
passive. Um, and we'll see where she ends up maybe next episode if it's particularly interesting to talk about. But yeah, this was a neat scene. And then I liked how Valya's like, "Here's Theodosia, take care of her." Um, and she's like, "I could tell you all about the dorm rooms and our classes." And she's like, "I want to know how exactly Cash and Todd." I agree. I agree. That would be the thing that I would want to know, and would also like if Theodosia's truthful with her, it's going to cause both trust, but with Theodosia as well as rage. And so
Mhm.
we might actually get her instead of shifting to damsel to vixen.
Interesting.
But
Because
she's still not like
she,
out of this like mentor. I need an authority figure. I need
yeah,
somebody to be watching me. Um, yeah.
I think she really does see herself within the context of being a sister versus being the heir to the Golden Lion throne. Like that's something she wants, but she's not seeing herself going to get it on her own. She's seeing herself achieving that through the sisterhood. So her entire
Yeah.
worldview is like through her as a sister, which is
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah. And also like not her own journey, right? Which is like a little tough. We move on to Tula's interrogation of Desmond. He floats down and she starts to interrogate him and is like, "Who are you? Soldier of the Imperium. Who do you work for? The Imperium. What brought you to the palace?" Freddie. He's such a weirdo.
They're so good together on screen. The
Yeah.
way that the two of them act and the energies and the nature of the two characters is so different. But
Yeah.
seeing them interact is so like I love the moment where she's like don't play a game with me because I'll win.
Yeah. And he's like, or she's like, "Do you admit to treason?" He's like, "I admit to justice." And so, let's talk about the hero phase a little bit more. Heroes are defined by their courage and their relationship to courage. Um, Bullies like Desmond, use courage in an aggressive way or like an arrogant way to control that which he cannot. Love, life, power, things he could never control. He uses his courage, his pushiness and arrogance to control others. Fundamentally, if we see Desmond get out of the bully phase, it will be because he submitted to love of something to transform. But right now, he's stuck in this negative archetype. Thus, he is still in the underworld
or stuck in this darkness. Um, and yeah, fundamentally, his job is to fight the dragon that is out there and to heal the sick king. And definitely, you can see from Desmond's perspective, that's exactly what he thinks he's doing.
How likely do you think that it is that he'll, one, move out of the bully phase, and two, in what scenario would he be persuaded through love to do so if you see that being a trajectory for his character at some point within the season?
I don't know if they're gonna give him that or not, right? It's hard to tell. What character could potentially represent this for him? We've been given a clue, which is a mother's or a sister's scrap of garment, right? So, if it's not love of self, it is love of other, family, or romantic or erotic love, of course, right? So love of other, and fundamentally that's because, to transform yourself, we often need to see ourselves reflected in another's eyes. And he is a scarred man. We hear those words, right? So he's got his scars fully on display. And that is sort of the idea that your wounds are visually symbolically on the outside. He talked about Pruitt, and then she's like, "Did you kill Mother Kasha? She was unworthy of standing next to the emperor the same way I see a blood trailing your every step," which we've seen that in the visions of Kasha, like the train of blood, right?
Yeah.
And he goes in to say that Shaialud took my eye and granted me the gift of what you cannot see. So, of course, eye symbolism, which has been connected to the worm. So he only has one good eye, at least symbolically. Blindness, of course, is psychic dismemberment, which I've already talked
Yeah.
about. But this also ties to the idea of secret knowledge or foresight, like the loss
Mhm.
of Odin's eye, where there was a bargain made to have wisdom because of the loss of the eye. So cool.
And this is where I have like a lot of theories in terms of Desmond, because we know that he's saying essentially right here, and I don't think Valya really believes him until later in the episode, but here he's essentially saying that he can see what she can't. And one part of me was like, does he have a robotic eye? But then he wouldn't be opposed to machines the way he is in support of the Imperium. And where would he have gotten a mechanical eye on Arrakis? So I was like, I don't think it's anything that has to do with technology. One of my other theories that I have mentioned previously is that I think he could be like a proto original kind of experiment of the Kwisatz Haderach that just didn't fulfill it the way that the Sisterhood would like. But I think this is true, but not in a way that they bred him, they created him. He came upon this power and ability through whatever happened between him and the worm, and probably whatever experiences he's had throughout his life otherwise. And that's revealing to Valya that it is true that men capable of having this inner unconscious uh, spiritual mental ability that previously was something that only the sisterhood was cultivating. And he's saying that to her now, that he can see, like, he's not just that he's having actual visions, essentially, I think is what he's saying. And when he says, like, I can see the blood trailing your every step, I think he really is seeing visions that are similar and mirror, in a way, the visions that the sisterhood have been seeing. Um, and I think, well, another theory, and I'll get to a little bit later, that has to do with Desmond. We're getting pieces of him and putting them together and whatnot. But I think he has prescience, at least some amount of it. And that's really interesting. And I want to know more about that and how he's achieved that from a literal, like within the lore standpoint, but also more about the journey that he went through in the unconscious that awakened this, because we know how the other memory and prescience is developed for the sisterhood, and I want to see how that's done for him.
So, two questions. Do you think that we'll see
Mhm.
a version of his vision?
And do
Mm,
you think that we'll see what happened to him in the worm?
okay.
Or is it
Yes.
cooler that we don't?
Well, it could be cooler that we don't. Like, it could be really effective. But I think that there is a chance that we could see that because this feels like I mean, maybe they could pull this out for like a second season plot, but this feels like something that, in terms of knowing what happened and understanding completely the nature of his ability, is something that
Mhm.
makes sense to wrap up
I
in
think it'll
season
be
one.
this season. Yeah. He'll be
Because,
resolved by the end of the season. He's the existential threat
mhm.
of
I think
of
that
the
either,
burgeoning sisterhood as a
mhm,
whole.
yeah, like I think either he'll die, be defeated somehow, or will just learn all of this information and he'll carry on as a threat into season
Mhm.
two. But I think understanding the nature of what he is and what he can do, I think we will learn in this season.
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell. Predators can sometimes turn into allies. They
Mm.
can be redeemed and then turned into allies because fundamentally they represent in a feminine psyche like Bluebeard. Bluebeard is one of the most common predators that I like to tie the sort of folklore mythic theme back to. So of course Bluebeard is the folklore about the husband who marries the wife and says, "You can have everything in the kingdom as long as you never enter this door in the basement. I give you all of the keys to my house, and I'm just going to go out on my hunting party and I'll be back later." And she's curious. And so she goes and opens the door with her sister and finds all the dead bodies of the wives that have come before that have opened the door as well. And the idea is that you have to listen to yourself, you have to listen to your own intuition to be able to sort of move forward against the patriarchy that wants to keep you in the box and not opening the doors, even if they're hard to open. And it's interesting because Desmond himself represents this patriarchal force that says these women should not have the power that they have, at least from their perspective.
Yeah, and actually, as you're saying that, something just like popped into my mind as another possible resolution to his character is if he has this ability of prescience, and if the sisterhood are like, okay, we're going to go on this route and try to create this Kwisatz Haderach, this super being, what if they want to have his DNA?
They probably will. So somebody's
And
going to
because
seduce
then,
him, and then he'll become like more whole or more balanced and may become an ally or just die. Well,
like, because
yeah.
at least, well, because the other thing is, in Dune Part 2, we see that Lady Margot, she conceives a child with Fade Rautha so
Mhm.
that they can preserve his DNA and his bloodline, even though they know there's a good chance he's probably going to die. They want to preserve that bloodline first before that happens.
Yep.
And so I think potentially, and at least it would make sense if this is the direction that the sisterhood goes. It would make sense to me that regardless of what ends up happening to Desmond himself, I think it would make sense that they would want to have a sister conceive a child with him in order to attain his DNA, in order to use that as the originating bloodline that will eventually
Yeah.
create the Kwisatz Haderach.
But it's in his blood all along. Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
um I love Natalia like cutting in now and asking like, "Who do you serve?" The Imperium, only the Imperium. And immediately Valya was like, what he claims is not like there's something fishy here going on. And he definitely has, I don't know which part she was referring to exactly, whether like he killed Kasha or like, he's
It
got these
might have been.
powers or
I mean, it because she says like what he's saying he believes to be the truth, but what he's saying is untrue. It's not accurate, and so I think she
but
talks to
and
it about a
he
few
also
things.
says what he believes is the truth, but what he claims is a lie.
Yeah, so I think she just doesn't believe that he has
Mm,
abilities. She's just like, he believes that that's the case, but I don't because that wouldn't make any sense. And then
yeah.
also him saying that the stuff that he was saying about how like the sisterhood isn't worthy of being beside the throne and that
Hmm.
Kasha deserved to die and stuff. So I think those are the two things where she's like, one, doesn't believe at all that he has abilities right now, and two, she's like, Yeah, that whole thing about us being a threat to you, that's not true.
And I want to recommend to the listeners and the viewers, like, if you have not watched our first episode breakdown, we talk a lot about fire, consumption, about his abilities, his scars, like all of that symbolic understanding is really, really important to kind of put us where we are in what we're talking about. So if you feel like you're missing out on stuff, feel free to go back and listen to that first episode, especially.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and so this kind of resolves with the emperor essentially being like, we're gonna keep him in suspension prison, but what you're saying about him killing Kasha, that doesn't seem realistic. And so that kind of like ends things there for now, anyway.
Valya and the Richese Reverend
Yes,
Mother
yes.
talking, and they're in the cool cone of silence,
Yeah.
which I have since the original Dune movie always wanted to see like every version of this because we go into it so we can't hear them at first, and then the camera goes into it. It's just such a cool effect. I loved it. And they're talking about everything that's happening, and certainly Valia is very pushy with her own direction of what she wants.
Yes. She's a lot more her composure is a little bit
Yeah.
um yeah. And essentially like what she wants is for the Richese truthsayer to get the Duke in line because he can't be a threat and they need to still find a way to obtain control of his fleet. And right now what Valia recognizes is that the Emperor's kind of falling through their grasp and he
Mhm.
needs to be reminded of how valuable they are. Before she can do all that, she says that she has to see a contact of theirs
Yeah.
named Zima. And so she kind of leaves it like at that, and then we'll see who that contact is a little bit later.
Yep. We go back to Wallach and we have more trying to figure out what to do. This is her conversation with Jen, who's like trying to be like, hey, don't sacrifice yourself for the sisterhood. Remember, it's sisterhood above all. It's hard to complete a mission when you're dead. Again, this is tying to the sacrifice of the children idea that, like, it's not actually right to sacrifice the future for the present. Unless, of course, you can't do anything else but do that. So it's a hard balance between, hey, what do I owe the sisterhood that she's facing, as well as what other people are telling her about, they're never going to care about you the same way that you care about them.
Hmm. I think that for sure, Valia's that kind of character where she does put before anything else. I think in terms of Tula, she genuinely cares about Lila herself as an individual.
Mhm.
And Lila has that bond with Tula. So I think sh- Lila needs to have these two different opposing opinions from Emmeline and Jen. But I think what this scene more so does is reflect Jen's internal turmoil. And in some
Mhm.
ways, this is her bucking against going within the unconscious and confronting your shadow because she's clearly not in a place where she's able to do that.
It
And
also
she
makes me
doesn't believe.
wonder why she's there. Like, does she
Mhm.
have no other place to be?
Yeah, I think it's maybe like she's just seeing it as the safest route for her, which even if you look at
Mhm.
historically, you know, people would sometimes join the church, not necessarily because they were in belief of God
Yeah.
or faith, but just it's the safest, easiest route for them to have a safe, probably long, decent life.
Yeah, that made sense. And yeah, like you read about it, sometimes like you were the third born kid, and so you were entered the priesthood or you went off to a nunnery. So we cut back to Kieran in the palace and he's scanning the layout of the palace. Does not seem to be for security purposes. And then we see him head to the club.
Before
Oh, sorry.
Just before then, because I think this is really important, is Kieran is doing that, and then we overhear Javaco yelling at Constantine and reprimanding him essentially for divulging that information to
Oh, that was it.
Chase.
That's what yelling was.
Yeah,
I
he was
didn't
he was
hear it.
like there was like kind of like it was a bit mumbled at first, but then there's a part where you can even see it in the subtitles. It's like Constantine's like, tell me what I can do to fix this. And then Java Coast basically he says something like, you can just shut up and play your balisad. And
Oh,
like
poor
dismisses
baby.
him. Yeah.
He was just trying to help, but he's so bad at. So Kieran heads to the club and he meets up with Michaela and other rebels, and they're
Yes.
planning on striking Carino himself
Yeah. Revel.
against a king, the
And
main antagonist.
and Michaela, because we know that she's a Fremen, and we see here that she's connected with the spice smugglers, which is a recurring thing in Dune. But here it seems like they're also being bolstered by this rebellion, which is why everything happened on Arrakis with Desmond.
Absolutely.
Horace is this guy's name who Kieran's meeting, and he's like, oh, everyone bow or whatever, because Kieran Atreides is here, the descendant of Vorian Atreides, the war hero. He's in the Schools trilogy, if I can remember correctly, but he's for sure in the Machine Wars trilogy that Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson did. And some interesting stuff happened with him as a character. I don't know if they'll actually put him into play in this series. But the fact they bring him up is kind of,
What happened?
well, something happens to him, and essentially he becomes immortal.
Oh,
He doesn't die, at least from old age. And so he kind of goes into exile for himself because he's like, I don't want to see my descendants die. But then during the events of the Schools trilogy, he comes back into the picture and he meets with some of his descendants. So I don't know whether or not he's still around at the time of this series of the show. And I don't know whether or not they intend to bring him into the picture at some point, but I think it's interesting that they bring him up. Yeah, so there's a lot that they could do with that. But yeah.
we cut back to Tula and Lila talking about the agony and the potential to hear these ancestors, the other memories. And what I found very interesting about this was like, symbolically, women are drawn to the idea of the inner goddess, right? The inner goddess being this idea that we we need to listen to the wild mother, the dark goddess, to show us this wisdom that we feel is outside of ourselves, but actually the journey leads us internally into ourselves. And what we discover when we go into ourselves, and often it's symbolic with mirrors, or we see a version of ourselves, or the dark goddess themselves looks like us. So what happens in the Sumerian myth with Inanna descending into the underworld to meet her sister is her sister, who is the goddess of the underworld, looks exactly like her. And what we discover in this sort of feminine symbolism is that the dark goddess has been inside of us the whole time. And that all we needed to do was have an opportunity to draw out that power and sort of understand that we have always been the goddess. So it's interesting that Lila is so fascinated by finding her mother, her birth mother, versus almost this like wild mother that Tula has raised her. In some ways, she's been the too good mother too. So she will be confronting the dark goddess in herself, who, could be Baba Yaga or Kugal, Persephone in the other world. That's the symbolism that we're heading towards. The goddess in the underworld is not a kind person.
No. And okay, so I have to put my tinfoil hat on, my tinfoil tiara.
Tiara, yeah.
For right this moment, because so in this conversation that they're having, they both acknowledge that the bond that they had, and that Lila used to pretend that Tula was her mother, and Tula would wish that she were, and that's why I gave you my most precious keepsake. And then we see what it looks like, and it looks like it could be like a tusk or a claw of some kind. But what I think it is the tip of a bull's horn.
Oh, like
And
an Atreides? Atreides?
Yes, because it's all carved. And so what I'm thinking is, because we know from the trailers, there is a scene of her young self that involves a bull. And so what I'm theorizing is, and we talk about in the pre-show episode about the trailers, we talk about what the bull sacrifice means. And essentially it is similar to a marriage or a union. And so my theory was there would be some sort of scenario of that kind regarding Tula's younger self. And so essentially what I'm saying is, I think she marries or falls in love with an Atreides. They encounter a bull, something happens, and the tip of the bull's horn gets broken off. And then Tula keeps it. And I think Tula has a child, an Atreides baby. And she wanted to give this like carved horn to her child, but something happens and they're separated. And that's why Tula has
So you're
this
telling me that
wisdom-
Kieran is her child?
Yes. Kieran is Tula's child. I'm so certain.
Okay, I love it. The fun thing about speculation is the worst you can be is wrong. The best you can be is having fun.
I'm having fun with this theory.
I love it. It's great. Um, so we move on to Valya, who's meeting Michaela on a boat. A boat, of course, being like kind of sort of like a bridge over water. So they're kind of meeting incognito, etc. And I thought it was super interesting. Their conversation is so neat because although Michaela's like slightly disinterested in burning down the rebels, it almost feels like she wants to betray Kieran for being into the princess.
Yeah, because we find out that Michaela's a sister of the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah.
I was not expecting it all. That was
That
like
was
a
great.
crazy reveal. That was such an interesting reveal. And
It also shows that so the Bene Gesserit have Fremen sisters.
It's so important. And like a few things that are really interesting here are, one, I think her reluctance to take down the rebellion is she does believe in the cause that they believe in to a certain degree, like caring about the regular people. But I also think she enjoys the power that she has manipulating all of these things behind the scenes, because she knew that from a theoretical standpoint, but she doesn't seem like she really understood it until she was actually in the shadows. And she even says that she looked up to Kasha because she could have so much power in the light, like being right beside the emperor. So I think she enjoys the power that she has. And she is reluctant to reveal all of the rebels and destroy this plan that they've been working towards, except for Kieran. She's very happy to be like, okay, so you can start with Kieran.
Guy. And I feel like there's something interesting in his soul when they discover that they're together, that somebody betrays them to King Mark. I have to look back at the story, but they're still following that archetype, which is really cool.
The fact that Michaela is a sister means that they have Fremen sisters that they're training. And that also tells me that we could potentially see, I don't know if it'll be Michaela, but starting to seed the myth and the prophecy of the Kwisatz Haderach on Arrakis. Starting to develop that myth and the relationship the Fremen have to the sisters, where they will give a sister of the Bene Gesserit sanctuary. Like all of these myths and stuff that they have about Beast and Al-Gaib, we're going to see the beginning of how they gain that traction on Arrakis.
We might not see it like
So
this
interesting.
season if they're
No.
like, but all the pieces are there. Let's build this puzzle.
Yes, exactly. I want this to be a multi-season show because of all of the things that they can do with that.
Yeah. So we cut back to Ynez, who's like quite angry at her situation and what has happened with Kasha and Pruitt, and sort of feeling helpless. I mean, again, like even though she's being quite violent, she also feels helpless. So she's still in this damsel-esque phase where she, doesn't feel like she can do anything. But she's pulling out all of her tricks to beat the hell out of the punching bag. And Kieran sees her.
And she's using like a Bene Gesserit knife trick. And he's like, well, it looks like you've been practicing, just nothing I've ever taught you.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm interested in this moment because Ynez doesn't have a predator. And nor is Kieran the predator for her.
Yeah.
Because he backs off like
right away. He's still this lover because of how much she's pushing him away, for full bore into like hero in his own way, right? Because of the rebels and what is happening. But they fight, they kiss. Tells him the story of her tragic shadow. I was
Yeah.
actually a damsel. I was kidnapped with my brother. My parents did nothing about it because politics. I was a pawn in everybody's game.
And they
Um,
kept it a secret.
and they kept it a secret, which is also like no justice for Ynez and
Mhm.
Constantine. And both of them are kind of broken because of it. Um, Goes in for another kiss, and she's like, "Knife to the tummy. I can't do this anymore. I was leaving before. This is not the case anymore. I'm here. You're not my consort. Like, I don't know who that's gonna be, but it has to be somebody super powerful, and you're not." Yeah, interesting.
Another parallel that I want to point out about this scene is the first time we see them sparring together, it's during the day and it's a lot more playful. But here it's during the night and Ynez is a lot more aggressive and there's a lot more passion to it. In a way, it's a
Mm,
sexier scene as well,
yeah.
because you can see the chemistry that they have. But yeah, I am curious because he's not a predator for her. Um, and I don't know if he would ever become one archetypically. But he does say this one thing when like she puts the dagger to him and is basically like, we can't do this. And then he says, "You're right, it would be bad for the both of us." And then he like quickly
Mhm.
leaves. And so I'm wondering if because Michaela kind of like brings it up to him when he goes to meet with the rebellion that there's kind of like a conflict of interest between the feelings that he has for Ynez and the loyalty that he has for the rebellion, which is opposed to her family. And so I'm wondering if he'll sort of reassert his loyalty to the rebellion and try and cut off the affection and the love that he has for Ynez. But I don't actually know if that would develop into like a genuine opposition between them. Do you think Ynez is going to have a predator or she's just going to move into a hero archetype on her own?
I mean, you don't need both of the antagonists. The common antagonist is just authority for
Mm.
maidens, right? You don't always need a predator. I think predators are much more sexy because it's about um moving from the maiden phase into the hero phase. It's about maturity and going through becoming an adult and becoming a person who is functional and is symbolically associated with going through puberty and first attraction and sort of the danger associated with that. So, especially in feminine focused stories, the predator himself is often sexy too, because he also represents a desire and sort of the trade-offs between desire and your own feminine in. Yep.
Right. Well, we'll see what happens there. But yeah. So after this whole scene between Nez and Kieran, we see Natalya go to see Desmond on her own, and she basically wants to talk to him and see, like, what is this thing that he has, and basically it comes
Mhm.
down to her telling him, "You have a gift. You should probably use it, lest it be taken away. You should probably use it for that." And she basically tells him that she wants him to use these powers in order to get the Richeses in line. And we kind of see it cut off there, but we'll come back to that in a moment because now we get to when Lila made the decision she is going to go through the spice agony. So we see her kind of saying goodbye to her friends, and then Tula preparing her and giving her advice and stuff. She's all in white and her hair's braided back. And
Yeah.
it's so cute because she's holding the little keepsake in her hand. Their relationship is really cute. Their bond is actually really sweet to me. Um, but then one of the things that Tula says that's really interesting is she says that she describes the four mothers that Lila will encounter as wild and hungry.
It's very wild woman archetype. Like the wild woman can come to you being very angry and scary, like Baba Yaga. Um, she can also be very vengeful, like Kali, the goddess of vengeance and sort of Indian mythology. Um,
what I was found fascinating is this setup. Like, it's very medical, and it unfortunately reminds me very much of childbirth. And in cultures, when you experience childbirth, there was a lot of thought you would probably die from it. Like, so, even in China, they actually used to call it going to the gates of hell
Oh,
when you were experiencing childbirth. And in so many ways, it's like a death like transformation. It's
it
wild. Yeah.
it kind of reminds me of just the way that everything looks. Kind of reminds me of Padme giving birth and Revenge of the
Hmm.
Sith.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it's a very clinical setup, which is
Yeah.
such a juxtaposition to how mythic everything that's about to happen is. So
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
she lies down on the table, and then Tula uses this syringe to put a droplet in her eye,
Yeah. And she's like,
which is
remember to
so
breathe.
Mhm.
Remember the light is all that matters.
Follow my
Um,
voice.
follow my voice, like it's all of that. And through the eyes, which of course we've had so much eye symbolism connecting to the worm. So it's like this is sort of like that, which is so cool. And she sort of awakens in this crypt, which is
Yeah.
filled with bones. And
Mm.
I've been um to the catacombs in Paris. Uh
Mhm.
there's not as many bones as there, but it still is quite disturbing to see walls of bones in a crypt.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
there's this
so
that was, like, terrifying where I wasn't sure exactly what it was. I thought it was a creature at first, but then I watched it again, and it's one of the foremothers crawling across a wall as if she's, like, a s a spider or a
yeah,
which is so interesting.
the exorcism, like
Yeah,
crawling
and,
across
like,
the rock.
yeah, and the sound design is it sounds like a spider, like, crawling, and it's so gross, but they reminded me of, the Spider Woman, which is a figure in Navajo belief,
Uh-huh.
and, she created the universe and everything in it through weaving. It stuck out to me as a choice, like, again, like the salamander from the
Mhm.
previous episode. Why are we depicting certain things as certain creatures or animals? And the Spider Woman concept, because also all of the people or the foremothers, they look like they're draped in these web like veils, and even their faces, they look sort of patchwork as if they're like strings or cobwebs and stuff. So it was very, very interesting.
Funeral shrouds, like how we saw all the
Mhm.
mothers like shrouded, like Mother Raquel especially shrouded
Mhm.
before she was sort of sent off in her funeral. But to me, it's a combination of like Arash Kagal, like meeting the goddess of
Mhm.
the underworld, and also this like Luloba idea of like the bones in the crypt. But it is an underworld location, like how we've talked about this entire episode. Um, and Raquel says the key to the reckoning is one born twice in blood and one in spice, a revenant full of scars, a weapon born of war on a path too short. A revenant, of course, being returned from the dead. I wanted to ask you if this felt like Paul, this prophecy that Raquel says
Yeah.
it could
You
be.
think it's Paul, but is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, could it be Paul? Could it be
I think
Desmond?
it's I think it's Desmond, and the reason why is because of the scars. Because here's my thought process: like, born once of blood, and then once of spice.
Spice
So
of the
what I think
worm?
has happened, the worm is how you create the water of life, and there's this whole
Mm.
life cycle ecosystem thing that creates this.
So
Probably
he's
inside of the
he's
worm
probably had the water of life in
in
him.
some capacity, like he would have. Yeah, so that's what that means. And then a revenant full of scars. He's scarred, but I think there's like also emotional scarring and stuff that like from his backstory.
Yeah.
Um, although this could be a red herring in that degree, but I think it isn't meaning
Okay. That's what I wanted
Desmond,
to know. Okay.
because she's and what she's saying of him being the key, I think she's talking about like they need his bloodline. They need his
Yeah.
DNA. That's the key.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I think so too.
And what's
Um,
also interesting is when she says like on a journey too short or whatever, or on a path too short, I think she's like predicting that maybe he'll die or something will happen to him. So they need to get his DNA before it's too late. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like this. I'm sold on this. If it doesn't turn out to be true, I'm going to be slightly disappointed unless it's cooler
Mhm.
than this.
I mean, it just makes sense. Like everything that they're setting up is saying that they haven't started doing the Kwisatz Haderach yet. And so it just kind of feels like they're setting up Paul. And it
Mhm.
wouldn't make sense to me that they would include a guy who has prescience and not be like, okay, this is how we're going to start making Paul. I
Yeah.
don't like,
Yeah, no. It feels natural. It feels good. Uh so then the vision twists a little bit. So she's able to transmute the poison because she's able to hear the other
mhm.
voices. And then we hear, is it like my little lamb or like my
Yeah,
dear one or something like that?
my little lamb.
Little lamb, but it's Duratea. And so she's the worst. You stole my future. Now I'm taking your hope. Okay, and we're supposed to believe that she dies. But the thing is
Mm,
about this is that you actually have to die to be
yeah,
reborn, right? And so you and I both think that she's gonna come back.
yeah. And it makes sense.
Archetypically, like it's not a permanent
Yeah.
death. Now it's a
It doesn't make
transformation from
mhm.
maiden to hero or maiden to mother or which is
Yeah.
queen. Like she's literally just like the hero's phase for her has been facing her darkness
Mhm.
and facing her dark goddess, the heroine's journey facing her dark goddess in
Mhm.
the underworld. Who's her grandmother. What a
Yeah, and
bitch.
I was, like, shocked that, like, Dorothea was actually like, "This is my grandchild, and I'm gonna kill her for vengeance," and, like, that feels
Yeah.
like that
I mean,
consumption sacrifice for vengeance's sake.
yeah, it's absolutely that. And also, like, she was warned that these old mothers are hungry. They want to eat. And that's like a big thing about Ereshkigal Gall too, is that she was punished by the gods. She was mistreated. That's being nice about it. And she was sent to the underworld. Like
Mm,
Dorothea is Ereshkigal Gall
yeah.
for Lila.
Mhm.
And how it is solved is through kindness to your dark mother.
Yeah, and
um,
what's interesting about that is because Maureen Murdoch talks about the Dark Mother, and particularly she uses Kali as an example from Hindu mythology. She's this goddess of creation, preservation, and destruction. She's basically the standard archetypal image of the birth and death mother who is
mhm.
simultaneously womb and tomb, giving life to children and taking it away, which is exactly what Dorothea is because she gave birth
She's,
and her
yeah,
that created Lila eventually, and now she's
she's
trying
gonna
to
remove that life.
she wants to keep Lila within this literal tomb, this
Mhm.
where littered with bones. It's
So
this is
good.
my favorite part of the episode. The way they shoot it is just gorgeous and like chilling, and I love the parts where you can see like the light in this area is her synapses firing,
Yeah,
and it's
it
like
was good.
lightning. It's so
Because so
cool.
you're
It's
on
so
the inside, you're unconscious, you're in yourself. Oh, it's like, mwah, this, like, I just wanna scream about how good the show is. Like, from a
I want
symbolic and mythic
uh-huh.
perspective, it's so cool.
I
I have a
want more
question
people
for
to see
you.
this. Yes.
Okay. Did Tula lie to her about her mother being dead? And is she actually alive? Because she's not there.
Okay. Well, that's what Dorothea says. And here's the
Yeah.
thing. If Tula maybe lied, but at the same time, she's not lying. And again, this could be that truth versus lie. How did the sisters do
Mhm.
this? Where like maybe she's like framing it because she says like
She died in
if you're
childbirth.
yeah, and she's like, if you're thinking about going through this in order to see your mother and just because you want to see her and not because you're ready, don't do it, is
Yeah.
what Tula tells her. So maybe she's doing that in a way that's like, yeah, but your mom is there. So there is a
Yeah.
chance you could see her, but like doing it in a way that makes it sound like she's not. But
Yeah.
then on the other hand, Dorothea could just as easily be lying because she's like, what would dishearten Lila? What would make her
Mhm.
lose this fight to survive if she believes that you're not even going to find your mom here? It's all worthless. I have you now.
Yep.
Um, but also, if she's alive, where is she?
I don't know. I think she might be alive.
And then why can't they get her to undergo the agony if she isn't already having done the process?
Yeah.
Why would Valya want Lila to do it instead of her mother?
Yeah, maybe she's just not
I don't know.
accessible by them.
Maybe not. Yeah, I don't know.
Sacrificing the children. Consumption. Yeah, so we go back to Lucius Secundus in the throne room, and Richezes is yelling at Carino, and I'm gonna feed you to the wolves, which is great because we got two wolves
Mhm.
as the title. And then Desmond slowly walks up and kind of like lets Carino tell him to do the thing. He burns him with his brain.
Yeah, and then he looks to him for because like the Duke starts like mercy, mercy, and
Yeah.
then his wife's freaking out. And then Desmond looks to the Emperor and is like, "Do you want me to stop?" Or and then eventually, Habakkuk's like, "Yeah, let him live." And then he's like, "Okay, so we're gonna let you live as long as you leave here and we never speak of anything that happened again." You're not going to bring up anything that had to do with your son, and you're not going to die. And they like scurry off.
Yeah, they do. And it's very scary. It's not a puppet thing that he's done, but I'm not pulling him out of that just yet because of like Natalya was standing right behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um and then Valya returns to the palace and is like, I gotta get to my meeting with the emperor, and he's not there. It's Desmond. And she's like, what are you doing? He fully explains his evil machinations. He's like, I'm gonna wipe
Mhm.
every trace of you and your sisters from the Imperium.
Flat out says it.
Yeah.
Like no pretense. And it's so good. And then he says that, your privileges at the palace have been revoked.
Yeah, I love that line.
And then she's like, "Oh, so that's what you want is to take my place."
Yeah.
And because she still has this one perception of him. And then it gets to this point where eventually she's like, "Okay, take out your blade
Hmm.
and put it to your throat." And this whole time you can see that he is struggling against it.
Yeah, he is definitely struggling. Like
Mhm.
it worked for a while. Sort of like how it worked with Paul, but he seems to have more power than Paul did in the early age.
Desmond's like actively his arms shaking. He's trying to not do it, but then he puts it to his throat. But then the moment that she's like tells him to actually use it,
Mhm.
he doesn't.
Yeah,
And then he has this moment of like relief, and then he puts it back in his
like
pocket.
I was
And
able to
Valya's
resist. Yeah, and I love her panic.
Valya's
Oh, I'm so determined, and then she's like, "Oh my god,
Yeah, she
yeah,
doesn't believe that he has abilities, until this moment, and then she's like, "Oh my god," and then he has this moment that's like chilling, where
it's beautiful."
he's like, "I always wondered what your fear was. It's not that you won't be heard, it's that people will hear you, but they just won't care."
So good. Oh
And
my god, it's
like,
so good.
it's just she's completely like speechless of this, and then she just leaves
Yeah.
because like there's nothing else for her to do. Which is such like an
Um, she's gonna go get Fred. Just
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's good. I loved this episode so much. Do you have any final thoughts, as we got to the
Yeah.
end of this?
In terms of, like, where we are now with this overall alchemical journey, we've identified the shadow at this point, and, um, as I explained last time, we're in this point of disillusion, and that's when you start letting go of things that are holding you back. It reveals what's been hidden, which is your shadow. And this stage is mostly represented by water, which is in itself a representation of the unconscious. The sisterhood as a whole, not just Lila, although we see it very prominently with Lila's story. is undergoing this process of entering this journey into the underworld and the unconscious and facing these things that they need to in order to move forward in this process of rebirth. Lila takes the Rosak poison, which is this liquid, so again, water, and it's made using what looks to be water when Tula puts it together. And we see when she's transmuting the poison, we see internally the way that it's mixing with her body, and we see like liquid visuals that are really like, and it comes in like a wave.
Yeah.
Inside, it's so interesting. This eventually guides her into the unconscious. But as we stand at the end, we are kind of stuck there. Lila's stuck there right now with Dorothea, and Valya has just confronted her shadow and is unsure of what to do next and hasn't rallied herself forward yet. So we're still kind of stuck in this place, but I'm excited to see what happens in the next episode to get us moving. Yeah.
And symbolically, the next phase would be separation, which would involve, from a wild woman archetype, it's wandering the wilderness, becoming one with yourself, like very comfortable with your own skin. In alchemical stages, it would be organizing your shadows. And so this ties to the wild woman archetypes and the symbolism of organizing your bones or getting the skeleton of the wolf back in place. This is all sort of very similar symbolism with different words. So it's about getting all of your baggage in order, dealing with your garbage, right? And so I think that Valya is going to bring back Francesca next episode because this will help her deal with some of the baggage. I think Lila will wake up and, of course, bring the truth out into the open, organizing the shadows out in the open, things like that. So that's my predictions based on just mythical journeys.
Yeah, like it makes perfect sense. And I actually think, because there's this cool moment where like it's Raquella for a moment, and then the body like holds her in this other position, and then she thinks it's her mom for a second, and then we learn it's Dorothea, but like Raquella morphed into Dorothea. So I'm wondering if Lila will be able to harness that in a way where she can summon who she wants to speak to and banish and put to aside who she's done with, who she doesn't want to deal with, to talk to, and she'll be like able to take some of that power away from Dorothea that she has right now. So that could be kind of pretty interesting. Yeah,
Scary.
It seems like that's where it's going. And I love that, like, all of this stuff that we're talking about when it comes to a mythic journey. So far, we're going on these journeys and we're seeing it's really satisfying. Yeah.
Yep. No, I'm really happy with the show so far, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. This has been fun.
You can, again, follow us at Podcast Above All across social media. Follow Dune Newsnet on YouTube so that we can see whenever the next episode drops. And you can find me at She Had a Spring on Twitter, Blue Sky. And where can people find you, MC?
So I'm most famously known for my Metamythic Star Wars podcast, which is called What the Force. You can find that wherever podcasts are found, and YouTube. I'm available at What the Force for that, anywhere social media is available. Or if you want to follow me personally, I'm Marie C. Gould on all social media platforms. But I tend to talk about whatever I want. So you get a potpourri if you follow me there, but that's okay. I think I'm a lot of fun. But most importantly, we want to encourage you to leave a comment. Make sure to like this video. It does actually help people find it. And we want more people to join the conversation and talk about this story in this way because we find it super fascinating.
Yeah, so definitely like leave all your comments, thoughts and feelings, and we'll be very happy to continue this discussion. Cheers.
We hope you've enjoyed your visit to the Sisterhood. Remember to like and subscribe so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and follow us at Podcast Above All on Instagram, X, and Blue Sky.